This morning we're going to talk about no equality for men, and we have 1 Corinthians 16, verse number 13. Quit you like men, be strong. And the word quit, if you don't know, that means live like men and be strong. And the theme has been no equality. And you can just tell there's no equality. When the portrait of this man was painted, that guy was 40 years old, and he already looked that rough and that hard. That is a joke. He was not just 40 years old. But the next slide is no joke. In 2021, in America, 2,390,000 American men committed suicide. And in the same year, only if we can say it that way, only 590,000 American women committed suicide. That is 4 times more to the men. And this is where someone says it's not a competition. It's obviously not a competition. But if you look at those numbers, then someone has to say, man, there is an inequality somewhere in here. And I don't think that's an inequality, if we can say it that way. I think that's the way that God designed the world. The world is hard, and it is the case that men bear a large brunt of it. C.S. Lewis said about the question, someone asked, why is it that God made man the head? And C.S. Lewis said, well, before we answer that question, he said, I have to ask. He said, is there a serious desire to reverse the roles? I think that when I did last Sunday's sermon, I think it was quite complimentary to women and their role and the great job that they can do, and just the massive detriment that if we didn't have good, godly mothers and godly wives. But we don't want to switch the roles. And it should be more than just the idea where women say, no, we don't want to go fight the wars. Well, maybe there's more things that women don't want to do than men do. And as we had a discussion about David and Bathsheba and Nathan this morning, there is a lot of judging that goes on for King David. To such a degree, I'm saying what we're going to look at this morning, there are some things that are just clearly wrong. His murdering of Bathsheba's husband and the fornication was wrong. But I've quoted Ian on this idea before, what he said. Someone asked him a question, and it was about things that were happening in the church. And Ian's response was, I'm going to reserve the right to have no judgment on that. And that's where someone says, well, if you have no judgment, then you're actually helping the bad side. You know, a person can honestly say, I don't know what side right now. And I might say, I just don't want to say. But here's the idea where I say, just in some senses, I am done judging King David. And on that basis of what we call him, King David. I have no idea the stress. And it's like, how ridiculous of common men to, oh, this is what I would have done. And I would have structured it this way. It came to pass after the year was expired at the time when kings go forth to battle. You're a king, you're gonna do battles. Other people, they might withdraw themselves. Somehow they're not in it. They've got some type of a reason to not be there. The king goes forth to battle. You go to the end of that chapter. When the morning was past, David sent and fetched her to, this is Bathsheba, fetched her to his house, and she became his wife and bare him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And I want to say this too about, we're going to look at it in just a moment, but David. Someone says, how David, and I've said this, how David ended up with all them bad kids? Not every child David had was bad. Solomon's not bad. Tamar, as his daughter, she said, don't do this. This is evil and wicked. And I don't know that Absalom would have become what he was if it had not been for his half-brother who raped their half-sister. And then the other part of it, too, is, at some point, as Joey had in the lesson, when Adonijah starts trying to basically run his coup through the kingdom and someone says, David doesn't know what's going on. No, I don't know what's going on with all of my grown children who are not inside of my house anymore. And how do you not know what? I can't know everything that's happening in the kingdom. I've got advisors for that. And Apparently, my advisors are not telling me what's going on in the kingdom. So there's just a lot in there. But here's what I do want us to think about. David, like most men, was very weighed down. David had a job that was multifaceted. King David is in charge of running the civil state of Israel. And to be king in Israel also means, in some regard, you are supervising what the priests and the high priests are doing in the religion. He is a married man, so he cares for his wife, and he has children, so he cares for his children. And it's not just I'm a boss. And I wanted to say to Joey's lesson, doesn't everybody wish that their boss went to church? Like, when you come in and have a sermon like that, it's like, I wish all employers would hear these and employees. But he has so much underneath him that he has to care for, employees, subjects, citizens, all this stuff. Shakespeare said, heavy lies the head that wears the crown. No, you don't want this much responsibility. And those of us who don't have that much responsibility almost take pleasure in judging these men, which is crazy. And I don't think it is a coincidence that he wrote these words. The man who had a job that was multifaceted, his wife and his kids, and all these employees and these subjects wrote, "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." 2,390,000 American men committed suicide in 2021. It's not morbid that a righteous man says, I'm ready to die and have rest. That same righteous man wrote Psalm 127, children are a gift from the Lord. I don't think that he just hates life. But this is not all of what life is. And now, as we say about David, who had, and I'm saying, you may not be a king, but you are king at your castle, and that matters. Men, according to the Bible, are called to live in 4 separate spheres. And I'm making the case, as I said, David was a weighed down man. Most men are weighed down individuals. In Proverbs chapter 12, verse number 14, a man shall be satisfied with the good by the fruit, satisfied with good by the fruit of his mouth, and the recompense of a man's hands shall be rendered unto him. One of the most consistent themes in the Bible is that we have to work to live. Someone says, well, one of the most consistent themes of the Bible is that God is merciful. Yes, that's God's role. Our role here is we have to work. And it makes no sense. Like I'm saying, anyone who reads the Bible, they say cover to cover, you got to work. And Ephesians chapter 4 says at some point in your working, you ought to be charitable with your work. And whatsoever you do, do it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. Colossians 3:23. You're not just a worker, you're a hard worker. You're a good worker. You can, take orders. I take responsibility when I mess up. I don't try to shift the blame. We're working for the Lord out here. In 2 Thessalonians 3:10, even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. That verse by itself worked very well for the Pilgrims when they came to form the colonies in America. Man, we're trying to flee religious persecution over in England. Well, a handful of people were trying to flee work. And when they got over here, they wanted to eat people's goods, but they didn't want to do anything. And the Pilgrims and the Puritans all rallied around 2 Thessalonians 3:10 and said, if you don't work, you're not eating. That's the same idea as the local prosecuting attorney who said, by watching What Does the Bible Say? He said, I learned 1 Timothy 5:8. If you don't provide for your own, you're worse than an infidel. And he said, I wore the courtroom out with 1 Timothy 5, verse number 8. Every man is called to participate in the labor force. And that actually will probably be the first sphere that a young man enters, is the labor force. But the second sphere, and these are not necessarily in any type of order, the second sphere that men are going to come into, you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, is the home. And for these people who, just sitting with that verse for a moment, someone says, I don't like the Bible. Why? I don't like all the negativity that's in it. Don't do this. Don't do that. And these people say, I don't like the Bible. I'd like to ask them, did you have a good relationship with your dad? No. I hate my dad. My dad was a horrible person. Huh. Wouldn't you have liked it if your dad was reading the Bible and your dad stumbled upon this? Do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in nurture and admonition of the Lord. Well, my dad, I never saw my dad. My dad was a workaholic. He did nothing with us. Don't you wish that your dad had read the Bible and got this idea of admonishing the children? Here's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. Nobody really dislikes the Bible. The Bible is so, like if you get in there and you read it, the Bible is so good for us that as we say this, we bemoan, and it's right, we bemoan the absent fathers in the community, but there's a lot of absent fathers who live at home. And if you're reading the Bible, there is no such thing as a non-teaching father. You may not preach in the local assembly, you may not be an elder, but if you have made a child until they leave your house, you punched a ticket that you have to become a Bible student. And it's like, well, what am I going to teach them? Well, you're going to have to figure that out real quick. These words which I commanded thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto your children, and shalt talk of them when you sit in the house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when thou risest up. And I don't think that we have, and I really don't think that we have anybody in here that when they get home, I've clocked out, I'm having a beer, I'm kicking back in a recliner, and I'm just on autopilot for the rest of the evening. Well, if you're working all the time and then you come home and get on autopilot, when are the children being taught? Because they're supposed to be having it when they wake. You're supposed to be taking them on walks and also putting them to bed. These are the times that we have them, and we only have them for a limited amount of time, and we have to give them the best that we can. And this is where someone says, well, I got to tell you, the best that I can isn't very much. You got to get better, because the world is gonna beat them up. But then there's another sphere within the second sphere. If you got a baby, you probably got a wife. But he that is married cares for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. Is the husband the head of the house? Yes. Does the Bible ever promote this idea of browbeating the wife? No. Does it talk about cherishing her? Yes. Does it talk about romance? The Bible does talk about romance. And again, you got to go out of your way to make these things happen. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse number 7, you have to give them honor. And this is the same thing for men and women. Husbands have to be worthy of respect. Wives have to behave themselves to be worthy of honor. But this is a lot. I'm working. I got this child that I have to care for. I have this wife that I have to. Hey, people, check out. You got to. These are commands. Yes, I have to be kind. I have to, with all this stuff that's on my back, I have to in some form create a pleasant atmosphere at home. Go back to this one. Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. This was another one. All this that goes in front of a child, the children have to see the dads involved in the church. What's important to parents will become, and if what's important to the parents is important to the children, then what's not important to the parents becomes unimportant to the children. And this is just an idea of we have to do it in front of the children. I have told that story like we were disciplined as kids. Somebody turned my parents in for child abuse, and then the government said this isn't child abuse. And then I've told that one story. I said only one time in my adolescence did I think that I got a spanking, like when it was done. I said that was too much. Only one time. I can't tell you how many times my dad apologized to me. Not for like spanking, not for spanking too hard, but just different things where he had to come back and he apologized and whatever went with it. And just one time, and I'm saying a man who's got weight on his back, who knows what I did at home, like if I left something out or I don't know, my just adolescent negligence. But he came in one night and he really griped at me, really. And then the next day when he apologized, he said there's a term called kicking the cat. And he said the cat is the first thing that greets you when you get home, but you got all these frustrations, so you just kick it. And he just said, when I got home, whatever it was that I had done, he said it was the first thing that I saw. He said I did not have to respond that way. Reverse, I've told stories like that, and Aria would have said something like, I can count on my hand the amount of times my dad ever apologized to us kids. But you volunteered for that once you made the baby. And then you're in the labor force, but that's to live. And the Bible says you can drown yourself in material. So you say, I'm out here working to live. Yeah, but you're drowning yourself with all your stuff and your bills and your debt to the point of losing your home. And my house, the people, with 2 spheres. Then here's section number 3. Not every man does this, but every Christian man does. I will therefore that men pray everywhere, lifting up holy hands without wrath and doubting. 1 Timothy 2:8. 1 Timothy 3:2, verse 8, verse 11. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife. Likewise must the deacons be grave, even so must their wives be grave. And 2 Timothy 2:2 says, the things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. There's not this idea of coming into the kingdom and being an inactive citizen inside of God's kingdom. Men who are Christians are called not only to participate in the worship, but there has to be some sense of Christian life in the home. Dads have to teach the boys to pray. You don't just figure that out. All this stuff has to be taught to the children. And the idea, too, is if you're getting your home in order, hopefully later on that manifests to being able to be a bishop in the local congregation or being a deacon in the local congregation. But if you start out as a Christian man who never got your home together, then we just know you're not going to be in that office in that role, which means what? You're not helping the congregation to the fullest of your potential. And I recognize, and you do too, that 1 Timothy 3 says, not every man who's qualified wants to be a bishop. And that has to be permissible. The things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. And we have individuals who do a good job participating in the worship. And the third sphere that you come into is the church, but I want to have this in here too. There's a lot of work in the Lord's kingdom. But usually people tend to only look at the public, which is what's happening right now. And so sometimes folk might say, you know, I'm doing this and I'm doing that to help out with the teaching in the congregation, whether it be Wednesday night, Sunday morning, whatnot. And that is good. And we've had a lot of discussions about men developing and honing their craft of public speaking. But here's another thing that goes overlooked. We have married Christian couples in this congregation. And the goal of every married Christian couple should be to become a Bible study team. When a tent meeting is completed, what usually happens is, I don't have any paper on me. What usually happens is a tent meeting is done and someone will approach me with a big sheet of paper of every good contact that they made during the tent, and they say, here you go. And it becomes my job to follow up on their contacts. What we need with the married Christians in Bible study teams is we need men and women who can confidently go see Tammy in Schoolfield. I got a phone call, and I knew exactly once I started talking to her. Someone called me from Alabama, and they said, hey, someone in your area is doing our mail postal service Bible correspondence course. Here's their contact info. I said, okay, I'm going to talk to them. They gave me a phone number. That's all I got. And so I called, and Tammy answered the phone. We start talking, and she said, well, this is kind of weird. And I said, no, it's not. I said, you're doing a Bible correspondence course from Alabama. These people don't live in Virginia. I said, so they call me. I'm a Christian. I live in Virginia. And I said, would you like to have Bible study? And she said, well, I'm involved in about 10 different mail, postal service, Bible correspondence courses. I said, well, tell me about them. And I said, if you're doing 10, that's probably confusing. And she said, oh, one of them I just had to cut out. But the first one she started with was correspondence course from a Church of Christ somewhere that wasn't Alabama. And I said, okay, this sounds good. And I said, we can send somebody to come talk with you. She said, I live in Schoolfield. I said, okay, I know where that is. And she said, I live in a senior citizen housing apartment. And I said, I'm fairly certain I know where that is, because we used to pick up a lady who lived in that building, and she'd come to Bible class. And I said, well, we'd like to come meet you, have study with you. And the first thing that she said, and this is becoming more and more common, first thing she said was, well, we'll have to see about that. She said, because I see a psychiatrist for my social anxiety. You are not going to, I'm not trying to be ugly, you are not going to be sectioned off alone in heaven. So I don't know what we think this is. I am one of God's children. You have to talk to me. And I'm not saying I have to be the one to perform the Bible study or I have to get in your house. People, we are not, and it's like you ask somebody, do you think that your neighbor is totally depraved? No. Then what are you afraid of? What do you think they're going to do to you? And we all get it. People are like, I think that we're feeling finally, like if you can say it that way, the chickens come home to roost on people like Kenneth Copeland, all the different, what's that guy's name? Kenneth Copeland, dude who sold the Jim Baker, all these different people are like, give me, Oral Roberts, give me your seed money. I think that people have a hard time really considering that we just want to come in and study Bible and we're not looking for love offerings. But what we need are Christian couples who can confidently go and orchestrate home Bible studies and make disciples. This man has died. His name's Ken Shepard. And when I was going to Wesley Simon School in Elizabethton, Ken was an elder at another congregation, but he would oftentimes come into class with us. And I'm just going to be honest for the sake of the story. I didn't always enjoy when Ken came to Bible class. And I am going to compliment Ken, but I have to tell you why I'm saying this part. My exact thought was when Ken would come to Bible class was Ken would make a lot of boneheaded comments. Just unnecessary. Just, why don't you state the obvious, Ken? But he would. That guy taught a lot of lost souls. Okay, he wasn't the most mentally stimulating in a Bible class setting. Okay, we're not basically calling scholars, are we? He was a disciple maker. He would regularly go to Tuesday night Bible study at the jail with Wesley, and he would contribute there, and he would help those women. His wife's name is Diane, and Ken and Diane would write to those inmate women, and they would study with them, and when they got out, they would try to keep contact, and they try to help them. And one day, and just Ken and Diane, they're leaving the jail. We're all leaving the jail. And Ken walks around the car and he gets the door for Diane. And I said, that's nice of you, Ken. And then Ken said, it's nice of her to let me. And then one day I said to Ken, because we were door knocking every Wednesday. I said, Ken, how are you getting so many Bible studies? I said, because we're knocking doors, and I was getting debate challenges all over the place, like down to the mailman wanted to debate me. And I said, how are you getting so many Bible studies? And then I don't know that Ken had really considered it, because he stopped and he said, well, we're not really making any of those contacts. And I said, well, how are you getting them? And he said, Gord Potter is giving us all the contacts. Not to just give you all a who's who of Elizabethton, but everybody in Elizabethton thought Gord Potter was a nut. And the biggest nut in town is getting the converts. If people end up in heaven because of Ken Shepard and Gord Potter, God bless them for being disciple makers. And we need disciple makers. It's not just about getting in the pulpit. It's talking to these people and being willing and ready to move time in your schedule to be a Bible study team of husband and wife. Men are called to live in 4 spheres. Here's the last one. Everybody's living in the civil state. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God, the powers that be ordained of God. For this cause pay you tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. And he says that we should be subject to the laws. We should pay taxes to the country. And you can discuss, and I would too, that the tax rate can get too high. I exhort, therefore, that first of all supplications, prayers, intercessions, giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all their in authority, that we might lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. There's a lot of things that are happening in this country that I do not like. There are a lot of things happening in this country that are ungodly. We're still living in quite a good country. I think when Ian went to Washington, D.C., I said, I think that says a lot for the country, that in the middle of all the junk that we have going on, that in the nation's capital, we got a museum dedicated to the Bible. Hey, we could be in a country where they said, no way. That's some good stuff. Now, this man wrote a book, and it's called If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. And the thing that he said was, we're losing our republic because citizens won't go to city council meetings. Does everyone know what the 10th Amendment is? It's for the states to govern themselves. What good is the 10th Amendment when all the citizens care about are federal matters? What's he saying? Men need to be more involved. And that's where all the men say, hey, I work, and I've got a home, and I go to church. Well, you're an American, and if you enjoy your freedoms, you better get involved with your freedoms, which means city council meetings, writing your congressman, writing your senator. When this stuff comes up, I hate it. Someone said, I wrote my senator once and told him stuff I didn't like. They put me on a government watch list. I'd like to know what that guy said in the letter before we start saying don't write letters. The civil state. This is where a man says, that's just too much. Work? Even if it's just a solid 40. Work, wife, kids, church, and the state. I can't do it too much. No. There are no excuses. You're in it now. You got brought into the world. I know it. You didn't have a choice in that. You got brought into the world. Now you're in it. And I've said before, everybody's playing the game. The difference is people play it better than others. The slothful man says, there is a lion without. I shall be slain in the street. What's he saying here? You can't make excuses. You got to do it. Or what? You're going to go hungry. You won't have proper dwelling. If you don't develop yourself as a man, you won't find yourself won't be able to find yourself a spouse. If you have a spouse and y'all make a baby and you don't educate, you're not going to be able to teach that baby anything. You want to have your kids like you when they grow up. You want them to be Christians when they grow up. And then the state. Here's our next slide. All four of these spheres, they're either complementary to each other or they compete with each other. If you don't work, you can't have a home. But if you work too much, you lose the people that are in your home. I have a lot of people who text me after the Tuesday morning Bible classes because I talk a lot about, or have in the past talked a lot about this type of material in the Bible class. And I have a lot of people text me and they say, my kids got grown. And the thing that they said he said the thing that they say the most when they got grown was, we just wish you had been around more. And he said, I was working so hard to provide the childhood that I thought they should have. And he said, I did get them a bunch of stuff. He said, but when they grew up, they all said, we wish you would have just been around more. If you don't work, you can't have a home. If you work too much, you'll lose your family. Work to have a home, but if you don't submit to the Lord and his church, then you'll have an unorganized home. They complement each other. I'm in the church, and someone says, therefore, I don't get into the state. I don't do politics. Well, if you don't pay attention to the state, then you might just lose your rights in the church. They're all touching each other. And then I say this, you know why we have such bad citizens? Because most of them don't submit to the Lord. All these things touching each other, complementing and competing with each other. It's tough. There's only so many hours in the day. And how much stuff comes up that's unplanned? I didn't plan on getting sick. Didn't plan on my spouse getting sick. Didn't plan on just loads of stuff. So, what can you do other than just really get strong and do it, or you check out and the people around you start suffering? I do think that this was just a downer, But I do think that this should be the relief. If you get just this one thing right, then the remaining 3 should start falling into place. I don't think that God, like you said already, life is hard. Yeah, but I don't think that God put us here in just this insurmountable pile. Acts 2, I think if people could get this right, the apostles' doctrine, they continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship and the breaking of bread and in prayers, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. If you don't get the church, then your home suffers. If you don't get the church, probably your work will suffer. There's a lot of people who can't keep a job, or they, just all kinds of stuff. And the Bible says when you go in, be a hard worker. So they don't have a job. They have an unstructured home. A lot of people out here with just failed marriages because people don't learn to behave in a marriage, and just on and on and on. But if they could have gotten the church, then they could have been having the rest of them fall into place. And here's what we have to think about this morning. The church should produce hard workers, good spouses, good parents, good citizens. And I think that we get it by lessons like this in the sermon that Joey had at 10 o'clock. But here's the question. Are you making the church look bad? Like we're calling the community, hey, come be in the Lord's church. And then they say, why? So that you can orchestrate your life. And the rest of these things just start falling into place. And then they start looking at us and say, you don't have stuff in place. You're not going to tell me, come get my stuff in place when you don't have your stuff in places. That's fine. I've come to the church so I can start getting my stuff in place. I got to start somewhere. I mean, you're punishing me because I'm not at the finish line. What is the finish line? Dying. Like you're going to be getting stuff into place where it needs to be until the day that you die. People are not considering this. Matt and I were talking about a man asked me, he said, I'm a Calvinist. Are you telling me I'm not saved? And I said, if I said that you're not saved, I said, is that such a crazy idea? I said, how many people have you condemned to hell in your lifetime? And he's, answer my question. I said, no, I don't think that you're saved. I said, on the simple, basic fact that you and I came to this conversation where I call myself a Christian, you call yourself after some sinful man, John Calvin. And as I was saying that to Matt, he said, hey, obviously Matt agrees with that, but Matt said, he said, that guy probably never thought of that in his life. Calling himself after some sinful man, not an apostle, not the Christ. But they do think about it because they use that same rationale to other people. There are plenty of Calvinists that would say to an Anglican, what, y'all just following King Henry VIII? They say it to Mormons, y'all just following Joseph Smith, about as much as y'all follow John Calvin. People missing the church, in turn, miss the apostles' doctrine. The churches of Christ salute you. There is one body. Ephesians 4 says there's only one church, and it's the body of Christ. It's not about building types and what's on the sign. You could just have a building with zero signage, and you'd still be the church of Christ. But, there are so many people out here. I was listening to a man talk about evangelicals, and he just said, evangelicalism is about worthless. And he's a very liberal individual. He said, it's about worthless. He said, all it is a social club. And he said, of course they pray. And he said, they'll maybe sing a hymn or two. He said, but they have no action. And they're not teaching anything. And I just have to ask, is it a coincidence that they're that way and they just happen to miss the idea of the one church of the Lord? I don't think it's a coincidence. And we have to ask ourselves this question again. How can we promote the one church when being in the one church is not changing the men in the one church? You got to start somewhere, and it's a lot of work, but you're in it now, and that is about the only option. And I'd say it this way, too. The wrong church won't teach the right idea. And I'm about to put up a water baptism passage, but I'm not talking about water baptism per se. If you're getting in the wrong church and they don't know how to teach the right idea, and someone says, that's right, they don't teach baptism for the remission of sins. No, that's not what I'm talking about. They don't tell people to die to sinful lifestyles. A very good friend of mine, my family, her Baptist pastor coached her husband to leave her. and she had not fornicated. It was just one of those things where the men came and said, I'm not happy anymore. Is that surprising? That people who say the church doesn't matter are not following apostolic doctrine, the apostles' doctrine from Acts 2:42? I don't find that surprising. Is it surprising that the Southern Baptist denomination, who tells everybody they're depraved sinners so they can't help themselves, and they're just tossing out this idea of once saved, always saved, you can fornicate, you can murder, you can just, they paint you to be awful. And then we're surprised when people act awful? You can't go to the wrong church and get the right idea, which is to die to sin. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Is there a lot of grace? There is so much grace that people were asking that of Paul. What are you saying, Paul? We just keep on sinning and we'll get more grace? That's not what I'm saying. How shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? It's something you volunteered for. You volunteered to fight sin. You volunteered to start changing your practices. And you know what you did? You obeyed the gospel, you were added to the church, and you put yourself into a community of accountability. But every time we try to be accountable, or we try to hold people accountable, that's when someone says, are you judging me? Yes. I don't know that I would say I'm condemning, but if we're going to say like right and wrong, you're making really bad moves. If I can say about front page of the Informer this morning, that's a note in the Informer. Why do you have guests at a wedding? It's not so that everybody can have a good time together at the wedding. It's so that you have witnesses to your covenant and people can hold you accountable when you start trying to break off your covenant. You don't get the right ideas by going to the wrong church. Now, was it a downer? I hope it wasn't a downer. If anything, y'all, you try to give some room to your fellow man, because if your fellow man is of age and he's healthy and he's married, then he's probably operating in at least 3 of the 4 spheres. He's in the state, he's in the workforce, and he's in the home. We try to give each other some room. We try to give each other the good news, and here's the good news this morning. Obviously, we're trying to serve the Lord. If you're reading the Bible, Jesus is working for you. Acts 7:37, Jesus had 4 jobs. This is that Moses, which said unto the children of Israel, a prophet shall the Lord your God raise up unto you of your brethren like unto me, him shall you hear. A prophet teaches. And to quote Kanye West about his kind of new agnosticism, he said, I did a lot of praying to Jesus, and then he said, and Jesus ain't show up. That's not how this works. Jesus is an educator, and if you didn't hear the teachings of Jesus, there's not too much I can do for you. So all these people, they're saying, I'm looking for Jesus. Well, whenever you find him, you're going to find that he's a teacher. And his lessons help us get us out of our hardship. He's a prophet. 1 Timothy 6:15, he's the King of Kings, so he's a prophet, he's a king. And a lot of people look at 1 Timothy or any king discussion about Jesus and they say, he's got the final authority. Who doubts that? Go back and read the story of David. What did David do as a king? He served the people. When Solomon's son Rehoboam was coming onto the throne, he just wanted to tax those people to death. And the older wise men said to Rehoboam, if you will serve these people, they will serve you forever. So Jesus is educating us. Jesus is serving us, and I would say he's protecting us. David went out and fought the battles. And Hebrews chapter 6, verse number 20, he's the high priest. Whither the forerunner is for us entered, even Jesus made a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And what does the high priest do? He offers gifts for the people, the sins of the people. He teaches us. He protects us. He forgives us. And you say, that's only 3 things. He had 4 jobs. Here it is. And he was in that sphere of being a husband. You say, well, I didn't read where Jesus had a wife. The husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. And he is the Savior of the body. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church, and he gave himself for it. I, John, this is Revelation 21, verses 2 and 9. I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And then it says, come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. Here's the point about it. He educates us. He serves and protects us. He forgives us of our sins. And like a husband would for his wife, he dies for us. Why? Because he loves us. And you know, that just ought to mean more than it does as you and I just keep moving through these 4 spheres in the world. We're on the job, we're in the home, we're in the church, we're in the state, and we get beat down and discouraged by all these things, and the thing that ought to be there is we should be saying, this isn't the totality of life, and this place is not our home, and God loves us. I'm here, but I am moving on. And here's how you make sure you're moving on. He loves us, so he died for us, and he purchased the church with his own blood. But if he purchases the church with his own blood and you're not in the church, where's the blood? Then they that gladly received his word were baptized. The same day they were added to them about 3,000 souls, and the Lord added to the church daily such as should be saved. The prophet, the king, the high priest, the husband, which is the head, orchestrated the church to be here for us while we're moving out towards eternity. Now, if you're just saying, Caleb, I'm in those 4 spheres and I am weighed down, well, then it might be the case that the prophet, the teacher, would tell you to make some lifestyle changes in all those different spheres. But whatever it is, I do think that the answer is rallying together with your brothers and sisters in the local congregation. There's work to be done, and I would say there's just enjoyment to be shared inside of the work. So those of us who are Christians this morning, we go out and we share the good news so that they can have their blessing, but so that they can also in turn go out and bless other people. Let's think about it as we stand and sing.